Hi there, friends. My name is Chris Wilterdink, and I am incredibly grateful for the invitation to be a part of your annual conference this year for Baltimore-Washington. I'm really looking forward to sharing some information about the mission, vision, and strategy of youth ministry with you, as well as covering a few basic concepts related to intentional discipleship systems with young people. I've been told that I have about 20 minutes for this presentation, so I've started my timer. Looks like I'm already almost at 30 seconds, and so I will fly through some really awesome information. I'm going to do a screen share, and I've created the presentation today in a program called Prezi. You can find it at prezi.com. And I will also make sure that the organizers of your time today have a link to my presentation so that you all can download it and reference it a little bit later on. All right, here we go. My name is Chris Wilterdink, and I happen to be the Director of Young People's Ministries, which is part of Discipleship Ministries of the United Methodist Church. You can find our information at umcyoungpeople.org and umcdiscipleship.org. One of the other really cool things I get to do, and since you're playing my video, I get to talk about, is I get to organize the quadrennial youth event. It happens every 4 years, and it's coming up next summer. Youth 2023 will be in Daytona Beach, Florida from July 25th to the 28th. It is open to youth who are entering 6th grade as of the fall of 2023, as well as those who have graduated high school by May of 2023. So 6th grade through 12th grade, along with adult chaperones. Really is going to be awesome, and I look forward to seeing as many of you there as possible. Okay, a little bit of background before we jump into the ministry pieces. Before the late 1800s, there really wasn't much of an idea of the life stage of adolescence. Really, you were a child or you were a full and legal adult. And when you were an adult, you were recognized as an adult in your community as well. This stayed the same through much of human history until the Industrial Revolution started to hit Western Europe and the Americas by the late 1800s. Around this same time, G. Stanley Hall introduced the idea of adolescence in 1883, and he coined the term itself in 1904. In the original definition for what an adolescent was, it was between the ages of 12 and 14, significantly shorter than what we recognize now as the adolescent period in someone's life. The reason that this was important is that idea of adolescence happened to coincide with the spread of public schools, particularly in the United States. When education became more of an expectation, the government put into place child labor laws in 1938. This allowed the idea of education as a formative part of a young person's life to sort of expand and really create the opportunity for an extended adolescent period. When G. Stanley Hall was coming up with the idea of adolescence, really the average level of education was somewhere around 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. Once child labor laws were put into place and public schooling really set foot as a part of American culture, this longer education period went all the way up to the age of 18, where the average expectation for education was that you would graduate high school and then perhaps continue on into an undergraduate or graduate level program. So adolescence gets extended to the age of 18, starting really around 1938 and then into the 1940s, because there's a huge economic boom post-World War II when we're in the late 1940s. And businesses and companies in the United States figured out that they could drive and influence adolescent consumption. There was money to be spent and money to be made by marketing to young people. And so companies started to target that market. And in fact, that youth-focused culture that was established with that baby boomer generation really never let go. And today, adolescence itself is a tremendous force across most of American culture, not only in terms of economic impact and the way that it drives the formation of music and film and TV usage or internet content, but also the extended adolescent period that now is widely recognized as going all the way up to something like age 24 or 25. Now, when we shift gears and start talking ministry, in 30 seconds, if I was to ask you what your church would do for youth ministry, you might start to rattle off things like Sunday night youth fellowship, what used to be known as UMYF. maybe Sunday school, youth choirs, mission trips, those sorts of things. And I'm leading that question a little bit because I did start with what. If you were starting to answer what your church does for youth ministry, probably you started listing some programmatic things. And historically, those would have been considered the building blocks of youth ministry. As youth ministry emerged and the adolescent age was defined from 1904 onwards, church started building programming specifically for those ages. And programs were designed because leaders started planning with their vision of what they wanted to create and offer for young people. If we keep doing ministry that way, starting with the what, we're all going to be in for very, very rough times ahead. Part of that is that by creating specific programming for youth ministries, youth were actually often taken out of the larger life of the church. And once youth graduated from their adolescent stage and realized that there was not the next level of something specifically created for them and their age group, they felt disconnected or disappointed in what was there. So we can't start with the what in our planning. We have to start with the mission or the why we create youth ministry. Now, the mission of the United Methodist Church, coming from paragraph 120 of the Book of Discipline, is to create disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And what I would like to ask is what it would take for your answer about youth ministry in your church to match the mission of the UMC. If you had a parent come up to you and say, what does your youth ministry at your church do? Wouldn't it be cool if you could say, our church helps young people become disciples who will transform the world because they have transformed themselves? Mission defines why we exist in the first place, and it's where you should start in your planning. Your vision defines what you expect to produce, and your strategy is how you will make your vision into a reality. Okay? Now, if you don't know it off the top of your head, I would encourage everyone listening to this presentation to spend some time after we are done thinking about your why, your what, and your how. What is the mission of your youth ministry? What is your vision for your youth ministry? Why do you do youth ministry in the first place? What will you create to turn that why into something tangible? And strategically, how are you going to do it? If you come up with a couple of short sentences for a mission statement or a vision statement for your youth ministry, spend a little bit of time checking to see if your church also has a mission statement or a vision statement, and make sure that your mission, vision, and strategy get along well with those statements. Perhaps go ahead and take the next step and look at your district connections and your conference connections. Is there a mission statement and a vision statement for your district or your conference? And could that be expressed or echoed in the mission and vision of your youth ministry? Now, let's get into intentional discipleship systems, but we're going to start with coffee. If I was to task you with making a cup of coffee, could you make a list of all the items that would be necessary and to write down the step-by-step process that you would use to make a cup of coffee in 60 seconds? If you feel confident about it, give it a shot. And what you'll find out is that you're going to need a few basic things. You're going to need something that you can heat up water inside. So you'll need water, you'll need a vessel, you'll need a heat source. You're also going to need coffee and at least some kind of filter, right? You're going to need some kind of action to grind the beans, roast the beans, and eventually mix in those grounds with your hot water and stir them up so that they start to brew and steep. And then you'll have to give it time for the water to start to pull the flavors and the colors and the aromas out of the ground coffee beans to make a cup of coffee. Of course, you're going to need a mug to pour that coffee inside. And then if you are like several of the loved ones in my life, you're probably going to want some sugar or some cream or something like that as well, because you don't necessarily just love plain coffee. The reason I use this example is that it is a process to make a cup of coffee. There are a million different ways to make a cup of coffee. You could come up with an espresso, with a cappuccino. You could add some chocolate and end up with a mocha. You could create a latte by doing some milk and foam on the top. You might be able to add ice and cool it down on a nice hot day and enjoy an iced coffee. There's a million different ways to make a cup of coffee. And you have to be intentional about the kind of coffee that you would like to make, because that will affect the process that you use to create that cup of coffee. Now, just like there's a million different cups of coffee and kinds of coffee out there, there's also a million different ways to do discipleship and to be a part of a young person's faith formation journey. And I want to encourage you as leaders to spend some time being intentional about the systems and the processes that you put in place for faith formation and for discipleship experiences. Because if you know the kind of disciple that you are hoping to form, if you know the kind of inspiration and the kind of lessons and the kind of skills and gifts and talents and passions that you would like young people to develop as they become world-changing disciples, and you can intentionally guide them through processes that will transform them in the way and form them in the way that your church sees as a healthy expression of living a life like Jesus, the odds are you are going to end up with young people who you as a ministry leader can be proud of and remain in relationship with as the years go on. So the basic idea is that when you've got raw ingredients and you add them to some kind of organized energy and some kind of organized system, plus provide intentional transformation opportunities, you are going to create something new. And that is going to be fantastic as you develop meaningful faith lives and faith connections with young people. Now, before I move on from the coffee, one last thing. All of us might not be coffee drinkers. We might be tea drinkers like God intended, and that is just fine. However, I like using this example because we're all familiar with the idea of what it takes to make some coffee. We've also probably all had some coffee that we didn't necessarily love. And at the same time, if you spend enough time around different faith circles, you may actually have met fellow disciples or fellow Christians that you didn't necessarily love at first sight either. And yet, those disciples were brought up through a system that helped to form their faith and create the expression of their faith that you are experiencing. So it's worth us paying attention to the systems that we put in place so that we are creating the kind of disciples that we would like to launch into the world, that we want to be expressions of our church, torchbearers into the future, if you will, that carry on the transformational pieces that your community thinks are important to include in a person's life. Okay, enough coffee. Quickly into the intentional discipleship systems. Simply put, an intentional system is a strategy to design coordinated steps that more frequently create a desired result. There are several simple things about that. There's three basic groups. There are inputs, those things that go into a system. Those would be like the raw ingredients you used in the coffee example, or when you're planning ministry activities, they would be the people, the resources, the spaces that you have at your disposal to create ministry opportunities. Processes are the actions that create growth or change for the people that are going through your discipleship process, and your outputs are what comes out. They're the things that you are measuring and paying attention to for how your inputs got changed through the processes that you intentionally organized and put people through. There are three things that I really encourage every youth leader that I do this training with to make a part of their intentional discipleship system. And here they are. First off, an intentional discipleship system should absolutely be able to recognize spiritual maturity. That is something that most of our churches honestly don't do very well. What are the milestones? What are the posts that you put up in order to recognize and celebrate someone's growth as a disciple and as a part of your community? Make sure that you look at those moments that you have that are formative and generative and take time to be able to celebrate those things. Obviously, it's easy to say baptism and confirmation would be two of the very, very regular ones. Also graduation if we're talking youth ministry, but those are three different things over the course of basically a decade of connection. So can you be more regular about recognizing the moments when somebody is spiritually mature or learns and applies something new because of what they have gone through as a part of your church? Second, every intentional discipleship system should give chances to demonstrate the great commandment. That is to be able to show our love for God and to show our love for neighbor. A little bit later on, we'll talk about acts of piety and acts of mercy and get back into that. But giving young people the opportunity to demonstrate their love for God and demonstrate their love for neighbor makes a huge difference in any activities that you're going to do. And finally, you also want to be able to create opportunities for young people to practice their theology. And this is part of our Methodist heritage. It's not just enough to be able to say that you believe something or articulate what you believe. It's also very important to put that belief into practice and to be surrounded by people that you can reflect on the growth or the change that you experience because of you attempting to put your beliefs into practice. We believe something, we do it, we reflect on it with others and discover how we're changed by God, and then we do it all over again and the cycle repeats. So those are the three big things that I would encourage every intentional discipleship system to be able to have. All right, I'm going to share three different system models as we talk about intentional discipleship systems, and you can find more information on the UMC Discipleship or umcyoungpeople.org websites about these. One of the more common ones would be an ages and stages discipleship system, where if you've got different labels like searching, exploring, beginning, growing, or maturing on the top row, I've also labeled those as like grades for what might be considered the standard ages of youth ministry in the U.S. So 6th grade all the way up through 12th grade. If you look at the column on the left, worship, community, spiritual practices, service and generosity, and Christ-like behavior are 5 items that we might like to see our young people experience and express transformation because of those experiences during their time in youth ministry. Now, the way that a 6th grader understands and experiences community should be very different than the way a 12th grader experiences and understands community. The same with their presence in worship. The way an 8th grader participates in and understands and gets meaning from worship should look different than a 9th or 10th grader in that same worship service. And so you can track growth and behavioral changes and what you would like to see people do as they grow through grades using an ages and stages model. A second model was actually based around the ideas of covenant discipleship. And again, earlier I mentioned the works of mercy and the works of piety. Well, the works of mercy are those things that in the Methodist tradition we use to show our love for neighbor, the top half of this graphic. And the works of piety are those things that we do to show our love for God. There's also some things that we can do on our own. That would be the left side of this graphic, the personal things. And then there's things that we absolutely just have to do together. John Wesley says that Christianity is essentially a social religion. And so there are things that are important for us to be in community, and those are the public pieces. So show our love for God, show our love for neighbor, do some things by ourselves, and do some things all together. If you were to break that apart into a similar spreadsheet, sort of like I did with ages and stages, you could say that everybody in our youth ministry should be able to do some of the acts of compassion, the acts of justice, the acts of worship, and the acts of devotion. And as they do those, we want them to be able to talk about how they're living out Christ's teachings, learning in relationship with others, experiencing God through our actions, and then being able to witness to that growth. And this could apply to any particular grade. It's not locked into a specific age of stage or development. If you've got a small accountability group or a small group, this would be a great way to be able to start making a covenant for that group or how people would like to interact and grow. The third model that I'd like to share comes from the Center for Youth Ministry Training, and it's called the WOW model, where you look at paradigm shifting moments. And basically, in a gathering of youth or gathering of young people, you want to allow young people the chance to share their wow story, something that shocked them or surprised them or caught their attention and they're trying to make sense of it. You want to ask why questions after they've shared their wow story and help young people to explain why that moment wowed them. Was it just that much out of the ordinary of their regular life? Or it was something new and totally different and they just couldn't make sense of it because it was so unfamiliar, or what? Why did that moment wow them? And then after they've been able to share that, help teens consider what culture would say about that moment. We all swim in different waters, and the members of our church are absolutely kind of picking up flavors and understandings and cultural nuances from the community and the culture that surrounds our churches. So teens, whether it's school or their friend groups or media or YouTube or any of those at-large pieces, help them bring up and talk about what culture would say about that experience or about the moment that they had. You as the youth leader or you as the pastor can then introduce them to God's perspective on that experience. And the odds are God's perspective might not line up all that well with what culture would say about that moment that wowed them and surprised them. And then that opens the door for you to help align their experience with God's perspective so that they have a new understanding and a new way of approaching the experience that they had and reflecting upon it and why it was meaningful. And go forwards, believing and thinking and being able to act in a new way because they've been transformed through that experience of processing and being exposed to your knowledge about God's perspective and God's desire for relationship with them as they grow as disciples of Christ. Okay, there is a ton more information on the things that I've presented at seeallthepeople.org. There are free downloadable PDFs that help across different age groups. And you'll find a whole lot more about intentional discipleship systems, both for congregations, youth ministries, children's ministries, and basically all ministries of the church at seeallthepeople.org. Also, Discipleship Ministries has gotten really awesome about free resources as a part of their store. So if you go to store.umcdiscipleship.org, you're also going to find a ton of free kind of continuing education courses and downloadable products to help you in your ministry with young people. Finally, one of the more recent additions to the collection of resources for adult workers is called the Crash Courses in Youth Ministry. These are 10 very short PDFs that are written to be basically read today and put into practice tomorrow. They are spectacular for part-time or no-time youth workers, as well as senior pastors or folks that find themselves leading youth ministry for the first time in a long time. Great refreshers and basically give you 10 different foundational steps that would help you absolutely do the best and be successful in the youth ministry in your area. Okay, I know y'all said I had 20 minutes. I'm at like almost 22. So I am going to stop my timer. I'm going to say thank you for listening so intently to what I was able to share. And I hope and pray that the rest of your annual conference gathering is just absolutely incredible and world transforming. Thank you for the energy that you are pouring into the lives of youth. They are the church of today. They are the church of tomorrow. And they are the ones that will continue bearing the torch and being able to transform the world because of the systems that you as leaders put into place for them to experience. Again, my name's Chris. Thank you so much for letting me join you for a little bit of your meeting.